for us. And just want to say welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to dive into what I hope will be a very meaningful program today. For anyone I haven't met yet, my name is Netta Meltzer, and I serve as the National Vice President of Community Engagement with Zioness Movement. I'm excited to welcome you to this program today. I'll tell you that it was right around election season that we at Zioness started to have some internal discussions about important topics like extremism and the vast political divides in this country and how to continue pushing forward our advocacy and our activism in such a divided social climate. And so today, to explore this issue more deeply, we've invited Resetting the Table to take us through their innovative approaches to connecting across differences. Resetting the Table is an organization dedicated to strengthening democracy and civic life by equipping leaders and communities to deliberate across political silos and address important public problems. I highly recommend heading over to their website, resettingthetable.org, to take a look at all of their various trainings and programs, all aimed at achieving this goal. And so today we're working with Michele Freed, Senior Trainer and Facilitator, who is dedicated to empowering people to create change for themselves and in their communities, and to bringing people together across differences and divides, exactly what we're here to do today. And we're also joined by Development and Communications Associate Nora Malatinsky to support us as we move through the elements of our program today. We're so grateful to Michele and Nora, who are here today to take us through the film screening and discussion. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Michele to get us started.
Thanks so much, Netta. I appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for being here. As Netta said, my name is Michele Freed. I'm a senior trainer and facilitator at Resetting the Table, the organization that co-created the film we'll be seeing shortly. And for those who are less familiar with Resetting the Table, our organization works to build courageous and constructive dialogue and inquiry across political divides in American life. And to date, we've brought together more than 53,000 Americans from a really wide range of backgrounds and viewpoints. And through rigorous training, courageous dialogue, and depolarizing media content, our aim is really to transform political disagreement from what is a source for so many of trepidation, anxiety, gridlock, and escalation into what can really be a source of strength and relationship, creative problem solving, and collective insight as well. And to start off, I want to offer kind of two questions for reflection. Without being able, right, to really see in the webinar format a raise of hands, I want you to consider for yourselves, right, how many of you would say that there are tensions in the face of political differences in the communities of which you're a part? And secondly, how many of you have avoided having conversations altogether about politics with people with whom you disagree? So for those of you who thought, yes, that applies to me, or had raised your hand or has applied to me, you're not alone, right? We are really at an obvious boiling point right now in the acute polarization of our politics. And so what we hope is that our time together today is going to really help those who are feeling reluctant or fearful of having conversations on charged political issues to be able to feel more confident that you can have rewarding, constructive, and honest conversations with people with whom you disagree. And for everyone, we hope that this session will give you more tools in your toolbox when you want to communicate skillfully across differences for the sake of relationship, for the possibility of mutual learning, of reaching others, or of having impact on different people's thinking, right? Or just because you think it's really important for us to be able to do this for our country and for our communities as well. And so the skills that we're going to touch on and practice today will help you achieve these objectives, whatever they might be, in bringing right together people, yourself, in conversation across difference, to have difficult, important conversations that can be meaningful, even in the face of strong difference and disagreement. So I'm going to outline what we're going to be doing today by way of just sharing a quick agenda. So I'm first going to share a few more words to give us some context for the film that we're going to view together, including what inspired us at Resetting the Table to make it. Then we're going to view the film. We'll have a few exercises that we're going to take part in, including practicing 2 foundational skills for charged conversation across political divides. We're then going to zoom out a bit and talk about why bother pursuing this type of engagement in the first place. We'll have some time for Q&A as well, and we'll close with a bit of a focus on what you can do in terms of next steps. And I also want to name, she was mentioned before, my colleague Norma Latinsky is here today also primarily assisting with tech. So if you have any questions regarding Zoom or tech, please message her directly. And she's also going to be putting a lot of prompts into the chat that we're going to be asking people to engage in throughout the course of this session. After our opening, this is going to be a really highly interactive session where we're going to be utilizing in the chat. So I hope you are ready for that and are ready to actively participate and contribute once we get there. And I'll also note for Q&A later on in the session, we're going to be using the Q&A Zoom function. So as they come up, as you have questions, please place your questions there. Netta is going to be monitoring that for when we get to Q&A later in the session. So first, a bit more about the film Purple. So in 2017, Resetting the Table went to rural areas of Wisconsin and Iowa, where the film is shot for about 6 weeks. And this area is a very politically pivotal area. If you look at a map of counties that swung from Obama to Trump in 2016, almost all of them are concentrated right in this region. And this is a swing that's stuck in the 2020 presidential election as well. The New Yorker recently did a piece that essentially calls this area right here, which we call the driftless, one of the tipping points of the tipping point in both national and statewide elections as well. And so in 2017, we did a listening campaign there of 330 interviews and a series of dialogue forums with everyone from school teachers, small business owners, dairy farmers, auto mechanics, and every persuasion of pastor and priest in the area. And we immersed ourselves in this area because we felt it really captured on a microcosmic level some of the divides and realignment happening in our country as a whole. Certainly an area and a place of political importance for the country. And so the area that you'll observe in the film is one I'll name that is very homogeneous, both racially and religiously. It's 98% white, but ideologically, it's an area with really a rare degree of heterogeneity in America today. While much of the country has grown incredibly ideologically siloed, even within purple states, in this area, red and blue still go to the same schools, same churches, and many people feel completely outside of the two-party system altogether. And so when we were there, we brought with us a team of 36 facilitators and interns, many of whom actually came from really deep blue enclaves like Brooklyn and Berkeley. And it's no exaggeration, really, to say that for many of them, the program itself felt like much of a cultural exchange program that one might take place in across the globe between countries as well. And one of our interns said something in particular that really stayed with us when she said, I feel like I've spent my whole life being conditioned to react to caricatures of many of the perspectives I'm hearing, rather than to the perspectives themselves, right? Let alone the human beings behind them. And so the seed for this project really germinated there, right? We see these kinds of growing perception gaps in our country, not just mutual incomprehension, but increasingly a mutual demonization, if not dehumanization, that's really bringing us to a precipice of real danger in this country. And if history is any suggestion, when societies get to a point where huge factions see one another in their gut as other, as enemy, as so dangerous, repellent, and evil, they think there's no talking to them. They have to be shut down. This level of divide has a real tendency to breed all kinds of harm, including outright violence as well. And so we knew that as an organization, right, we can't bring everyone across the country for these types of exchanges and moments, even pre-COVID. But film can really be a great tool for proxy journeys in a way, right? For getting out of our like-minded enclaves to really cross distances of background and viewpoint, and to get a small window into what it's like to be and to learn from other people who aren't already part of our world. So we chose this area for our film because it's unique. It's, because of its ideological heterogeneity, its political decisiveness and divisiveness, and our unique access and relationship that allowed us to give more multi-dimensional representation to rural areas and people that are really all too often flattened or neglected altogether in media as well. Now, I want to mention, right, as we're about to view this film, it's not a portrait of all of America. Not all voices, perspectives, and identities are at the table. It's more a portrait of this place in particular, and also the kinds of conversations that we want to help make available throughout our country in the face of differences and divides in many places. So in 2019, we brought together a cross-section of community leaders and everyday folks from a range of demographics and viewpoints representative of the region. And the short film that we're about to see now captures one of those groups we brought together and them investigating their differences in the role of government, work ethic, privilege, and the social safety net. So with that, we'll go ahead and watch the film together. It's about 21 minutes.
How many of you would say that you've witnessed or experienced tensions connected to political differences in the communities within which you're a part? Okay. How many of you have avoided talking with someone about some controversial topic or political issue because you know that they are in a different place than you are? All right. Yeah, we are in an epidemic of a contempt, anger, and siloing with respect to political differences and divides in our country. Studies have found that we are more divided in America today than at any point since the Civil War. Right here in the Driftless is one of the more purple areas in the country, with strong red and blue, living in the same neighborhoods, often going to the same churches, and also many people here who would define themselves as purple or something other, don't feel like they fit into the two-party system very well at all. So we're going to be doing a few different exercises to really delve into who we are. We're going to give you several minutes to make a list. Moments in your life that most powerfully formed or changed your personal, moral, or political makeup.
I'm at total peace on the river. That's where I spend most of my time because it is honest, basic, and unforgiving. And as a young person, the death of a baby brother, grandpa, and my favorite aunt within a 6-month period when I was 12 years old influenced the rest of my life. That's why I became a paramedic and a firefighter, rescued, saved lives. I'm still willing to lay down my life, if necessary, for a total stranger. I think of all the human traits, the one I treasure most is integrity. If I tell you I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there. If I tell you I got your back, I got your back, and that's not going to change. That's pretty much it. So who's next?
I grew up in a small town, very religious. We were homeless for a while. We were hungry for a while. My parents were too proud to take assistance, and that translates a lot into my politics and my approach. I also identify within the LGBT community as bisexual is probably the easiest term to use. I was suicidal a good chunk of my high school career because I kept questioning why God would make me like this, or why would I just want, in a sense, pray the gay away. So my big formative life was going to college, to be honest, and getting away from my small town and figuring out who the heck I am. And the job that I do now works on seeing people's humanity and seeing them for themselves and all of who they are and what they bring to the table. And I've spent my life seeing how people are not valued by the way they are or for who they are.
I have no idea what your views of the scriptures are, but all the principles of are in there as far as relationships, where we value another person ahead of ourselves, where we are good employees with integrity, where we are good bosses who don't lord it over those entrusted to us. I mean, it's just like, aren't those just about everything that we need for life? My parents divorced when I was 10 years old. I didn't know any other kids at that time whose parents are divorced. And I was from the generation where all of a sudden divorce was starting to grow and become rampant, and broken families that we didn't have prior to the 60s and 70s. And so seeing the ramifications and what that's done in our culture, where I end up politically, and it's basically whatever we can do as a society to support strong families. And if we do it right, the way we're meant to, that so many of our other problems wouldn't be where they're at.
I was born abroad in the West Bank, moved to America when I was very young. I was more often excluded from groups in elementary school for a lot of different reasons, whether it was because I didn't play Sega Genesis like they did, or I didn't know who my favorite baseball team was, right? I grew up in a very poor inner city, so I always try to be on the side of the underdog. In college, I started after-school programs. I led bicycle trips with kids, and seeing kids expand their understanding of their communities and where they can go, always, maybe it was a dopamine hit, right? Like, I always wanted to do more for more people.
We're going to do an activity designed to purposefully surface some of the differences and divides that are present in the room, and then we will have an extended conversation on some of the issues that have arisen or some of the things that we know we all care about most.
We're so locked into our parties, and one's going to take the extreme of the other.
Is it one immigrant? Is it 1,000? Like, where do we start to care about the humanity that we're showing other people?
It feels like we all value the autonomy of a mother, and that we all value life in the womb.
I don't think the government has any voice in this. Nobody owes me a living. Nobody owes them a living. Earn it.
1% of our population owns 90% of the wealth.
A little voice inside said, this is important to do, so that's why I'm here. I'm supposed to be here.
There is this question around the social safety net, what it offers, and the problems with it. Earlier, several of you focused on a frustration or a critique, but there were differences here.
I believe in a social safety net because I also believe ultimately that I benefit. My security is taken care of not just by cops who stop bad people, but by social benefits that provide food to people who then don't have to go out and rob others in order to eat, right? And in that way, I feel more secure in the society that I live in.
I was a firefighter, paramedic. 25 years I did this. And some people really who are in need, I mean, you feel compassion for them, but other people that just milk the system for all it's worth, I don't think it's right.
I so agree with that. And I just thinking of the analogy of a parent, just how hard it is for a parent to let their kids fail in any way or to be needy in any way. And yet, the more that I continue to do for them and bail them out on things, and the less they're going to learn important life lessons. And so I think we struggle with that as a society. How do we best care for people, but not do so much that we are inadvertently keeping them in dependency? You know, we're part of a church, and we do our best with benevolent fund and helping people. But the other thing we do work really hard at is strengthening families. You know, empower kids to make good choices, that babies are birthed in healthy marital situations, not single, you know, all those kind of cultural things that really do contribute to economic stability.
As Karen was saying there, I think that's important that we teach these kids and then get out of the way as much as you can. Because as long as you're dependent on somebody to do the work for you, why should you do the work? There's no incentive.
This brings up so much.
Yeah.
I don't think our government does enough for the people that live in this country. I think that the way our country was set up to begin with, being on stolen land from people, and then we have built a country on the back of slave labor and continue to in some ways. I really don't feel like most people wake up thinking that I want to be one of these like nags on society. If we're a country built on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but we ensure that most people have no chance at happiness, how are we really upholding any of this?
Something sort of energized me, AJ, that people can't begin to understand sort of the injustices that we live in, and that formed the base and foundation for people who are doing well. And then thinking about, the way that I view the social safety net, and it comes back to something that no one's really said the word much today, but privilege, right? Going back to Karen, you talk about helping your children, but realizing that helping them has in some ways hindered them. To which I say, you provided more for your kids than just the things that they wanted, but you probably provided them the tools and the support and the love and the knowledge that if they miss a car payment, you'll support them for that month if they prove that they can pay it for the next month. Whereas there's so many people who, if they miss that car payment, they can't turn to anyone. So there's a privilege that your children also carry with them.
Well, Akram, I don't know anybody, anything. So when I was in junior high school, I got a 50-cent a week allowance. Fantastic. Got into high school, say, Dad, I'm going into high school now, I'll be taking girls out, going to football games, a little more allowance. He said, how much were you thinking? I said, well, $1. Just get a job. And that was the last I was on the dole. Now, if somebody can't work for whatever reason, by all means, we need to support these people every way possible. They deserve a quality of life. But if they can work and they don't want to work or not work much, why in the world should people who have worked their entire life? I started working when I was 13 years old, and I'm still working. I'm a senior citizen, and I'm still out there busting my hump 200 days a year when possible, either doing farm work or herding cattle or guiding. Why should I pay for anybody? Supplement their type of thing.
I think that a lot of times that when people don't work, there are other reasons there, right? Whether they don't know how to interview very well or they don't have the skills. You talked about at 13, you were able to go and get a job because your dad told you to. You used skills that your father probably taught you.
Well, Akram, if this doesn't begin in the home, who's responsible for it?
In a lot of other societies, it's not just the nuclear family unit that's responsible for children, but the collective.
My dad, when he cut off my allowance, he said, go get a job. He called my uncle, said, hey, I got a worker for you. So I started at the princely wage of $1.25 an hour.
With your uncle?
With my uncle.
Who was looking out for you?
Well, no, he set me straight. This life is not easy, guys. Even though we're living in America where it's about as easy as it gets, you still got to fight for everything that's worth fighting for.
But I think for some, it is easier. I was a poor trailer trash kid when I was growing up, and we were on some of that assistance. And if you are coming from 3 generations of living off social services, you're not learning that work ethic. So now I have 40 employees because I've worked my ass off to get there. But I was also fortunate enough that my father-in-law had the capability of signing on the dotted line for that first house I needed to get to start my business. And if I wouldn't have had that.
So you're giving recognition to the fact that when you have social networks who are able to help, you have greater likelihood that your work will produce better outcomes.
Yeah, but you also have to be willing to work hard to get there.
But it's not enough?
No.
And what Ted said essentially was like, okay, well, if you don't have those networks, whose responsibility is it? Is it the government's responsibility? And it sounded like, you said, Akram, there's a communal responsibility. Karen, you said, like, we're doing this as much as we can in the church. Whose responsibility is it? What do people think?
I just want to echo that point again. One of our values at church actually is intergenerational relationships. So instead of just the financial and economic handout, we need the older generation teaching the younger generation these work ethic things. We need that hard work of people caring enough to get in there and help these struggling families. Marvin Olasky, the editor of World Magazine, says social justice is a sum of millions of acts of relational justice. So we tend to think of it as who we vote for, and it's those big things, but it's not. It's those small little things that we do every day to connect and mentor the next generation.
Is there a difference for you if that connecting is enabled by the church and enabled by government
It's
institutions?
probably a both and.
It's probably a both and
for sure, yeah.
AJ, I heard you express a lot of discouragement, especially about what you called the lack of people's ability to pursue life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Can you imagine things that societally or governmentally could be done that would make you feel like, okay, people do have a fair shot? In your sort of dream, I'm curious how it would actually play out if you could control the levers for a day.
Nobody wants to answer that question.
Think of the
You do not want me to answer that question. I want people to be in a place where all their basic needs are being met on the daily without having to justify why they deserve to have basic needs. Like, if you're another human being, you deserve to have access to health care, to food, to shelter.
And this whole argument about work ethic, that doesn't...
You're a
that
human
seems like a
being.
mistake.
Like,
just by virtue of being a human being.
in my opinion, yeah. There are so many times that I've been working my ass off and got nowhere. Like, I just had a conversation with my mother who's been at her job for 20 years and is making $15 an hour. And she's been there forever.
Look at our groups and what you said. I mean, here you have a master's degree, you're highly educated, very intelligent, and you've got a huge student debt. I think you said like $19,000.
Oh, no, $130,000.
$130,000. So, could you vote for a Democrat candidate who says, okay, come on in, free college?
Sure.
So you're,
I want everyone to have access to education.
so you're still willing to eat that $130,000
Yes.
in debt? Whoa.
I know I'm radical. It's
Isn't that
scary.
putting you at a disadvantage?
Yes.
Wow.
I don't want people to struggle as hard after me. I want people to find value in each other and to find value in community. And if that means me sitting here and being in debt the rest of my life while someone else gets a free ride, like, cool. Like, I really hope that when you get that education, you see the value in yourself and what you can give the community. And then that will come back in return for me. I play the long game.
Let's talk about the long game for a second. What about the people that came before you?
What do you mean?
Well, I've been working for 55 years. I still have to work till the day I drop because my pension is diminishing with each dollar.
Just so we're clear on what's
Yeah.
being said here, you're saying, well, I'm still here, actually, and the policies you're talking about are going to harm me.
And the money in my earning capacity keeps going down the older I get. I'm wearing out.
I'm also willing to give you what you need.
I don't want you to give. I've earned it.
It's not about that.
There's, I think, an underlying difference here that's emerging. You're saying in terms of policy, the very problem he's naming, well, that's something we can and should address. That's not right. And it sounded like what you're saying is, I don't want that.
Throw the old dog a bone?
No.
I won't take it.
It's about community. Like, all of our families used to take care of each other. We used to have grandparents that lived in our house, and our parents lived in our house, and we've moved away from that. And with that, we've moved away from valuing our folks who are older than us. Like, it's not about a handout. I should be taking care of you because I value you as a perfect person. And it's not about taking care, because you would have taken care of me when I was younger. And you were doing that by contributing to society as a working person.
There's a fundamental different interpretation of the moral quality of something coming to you from government. There was a sense of integrity and pride that getting more from government undermines that pride as far as you're concerned, undermines that integrity. You're saying absolutely, as far as that's concerned. That is a different interpretation than what AJ is saying, which is government programs should be not demeaning. It's a way to honor people as they're growing older with care. It's like radically different ways of looking at what would happen as government is supporting retirees.
When I hear you talking about community, we need to take care of one another, it sounds like you're mostly saying that means that the government becomes our community. Isn't there also a part of that that then disincentivizes each of us in our own giving, because the government will do it? And in unintended consequences, we begin to lose community because we're no longer obligated to one another in that way because the government will take care of it. And I know I've been guilty of that sometimes. So I'll say, well, they're on food stamps, they're fine. Whereas before we had quite that growth of that safety net, we did just inherently, we took care of our elderly. They were in our homes because we had to, and community was built
So
in.
you're saying the very community that AJ wants to achieve, if the vehicle is government, people don't rise up
Right,
to
yeah.
care for one another
Yes,
because you think that this person is being taken care of by this program or that
Exactly.
program, and the very social relationships that AJ has returned to over and over again don't actually get invested in.
This is more than just our government, it's our culture, it's our way of life. I don't really want anything to do with how we govern right now, but I'm trying to work with you all to find that solution and really work toward the middle, to be honest with you. As much as I am radical
Says the
as shit,
socialist.
that's the thing about our country is we are able to sit down and have these conversations, and I do not take that for granted. I use my voice all the time because I have a right to use my voice, and a lot of other places in the world do not have that right. And so we need to continue to do this because that's what all of the people who came before us died for. That's why, is so we can sit here and have this discourse.
I really appreciate hearing your thoughts and understanding your worldviews and having you listen to mine in a real way. I feel like through these kinds of conversations with people of extraordinarily different belief systems, it is always incremental, it's always forward progress for the betterment of everyone.
It's been really neat to share this with intelligent conversation with people a lot smarter than I am, a lot more perceptive and open-minded than I am. This is just a fine group of Americans, and only in this country could we have such diverse opinions and still have hope. America's best days are yet to come. That's what I take away from this.
I will name my appreciation for this helpful reminder that people of opposing political viewpoints aren't the caricatures that I sort of often assume that they are. It's been a joy for me to encounter people who bring more nuance and complexity to their politics than I sort of lazily assume is true most of the time. So thank you.
So after watching that film, what I'm going to ask everybody to do and invite you to do is just take a moment to jot down for yourself something from the film, a moment from the film that stayed with you, something that stuck with you or moved you. Just take a moment of reflection. Jot down one moment that stayed with you, something that stuck with you or moved you. And again, just because of the nature of the webinar, as I ask these questions, I'm going to ask you to either put them into the chat or just write them down for yourself. And as it relates to reactions, from the film, I'm sure there are many thoughts, reactions, and also questions on your mind. And just as a reminder, as we have questions along the way, we're going to want to capture them, especially so that we can hold them for the Q&A later down the line. So for questions that come up, please make sure you put those in the Q&A box in the Zoom webinar space. Netta is going to be reviewing those questions, and we're going to address as many of them as we can at the end of the program during the specific Q&A session as well. And so now what I want to do, and I thank you for many of these beautiful reflections after watching it as well. I'm going to transition us into an experiential process to practice together some of the skills for doing the kind of communication across divides that's depicted in the film. So one of our intentions when we aim to do this work is to put into practice a core principle for speaking successfully across divides. And that's the value of, first and foremost, just slowing down, of pausing some of our own reactions and first making sure that we understand others before we react and we respond. And this is something that I'll name, right? We are absolutely conditioned against in our polarized political culture right now. Many view the film, and understandably, some of the reactions that take place is people want to get in there and around the table and argue with some of the core characters. And the process that we've designed centers on pressing pause on all of that, slowing down, and really taking the time to first capture the views of all the core protagonists and to be able to really understand them on their own terms and through their own lens before responding with and discussing what are our own perspectives, reactions, and challenges as well. And doing this, right, because this is so different than the ways that we've been conditioned for, is hard, right? It's hard to really focus on working to understand someone else, especially when you disagree with them, before being able to offer your own challenge there as well. But what we're going to do now to slow things down is we're going to touch on two skills in relation to the characters in the film that we teach as foundational building blocks for collaborative conversation across political divides. And these skills are part of what made the conversation in the film go well, and are skills that can help us talk to each other rather than past each other while we're able to address charged issues directly. So the first skill that we're going to practice is often called a reflection. It's an effort to demonstrate to the people that we see them as they wish to be seen. And so in a conversation, when you're speaking to somebody, they might say something and you might offer a reflection, which would sound like, let me see if I get it. For you, it's this, this, and this. Did I get that right? And when we're offering this reflection, we're aiming to show people that we've heard them, to get to the point where they would say, yes, exactly, that's it. We call that hitting the bullseye. And when we hit the bullseye, what we've been able to do is capture the heart of the matter of what it is that really matters most to the people that we're speaking with, right? You might have noticed the facilitator, Eyal, doing this actually quite a few times in the film. For example, at one point, when Ted is talking, after he finishes, he says to him, Ted, so what you're saying is, well, I'm still here actually, and the policies you're talking about are going to harm me. And he checks in with Ted to see if he got it right and waits for Ted to say, absolutely. That's a bullseye reflection. And there's a few different reasons we do this. The main one is that there's a wealth of research now that shows the more people feel that who they are is truly seen by others, the more they're going to feel a sense of ease and connection, even in the face of strong difference and disagreement with the people they're engaging with. Right? When people feel seen as themselves, as they wish to be seen through their own lens, they're going to be far more likely to be receptive, to be flexible, and even generous with others in these conversations. And they're more likely to be able to overcome their confirmation bias and to take in ideas, people, or challenges that they otherwise might be really quick to dismiss or reject altogether. And so hitting the bullseye, in short, creates this space for mutual receptivity, that capacity to really take each other in, even in the face of strong differences. And again, this can be tremendously challenging when many of us are operating in relative silos and often unaware we're projecting all kinds of things onto our ideological counterparts unwittingly as well. And many of us, especially through siloed media, are oftentimes encountering what's the worst possible versions of others' thinking, rather than a more accurate, let alone generous portrayal of who they are and what they really care about here. So what we're going to do is take some time now to try to give a couple bullseye reflections to the characters in purple as a way of both practicing this skill and showing how the film can be used to support your or community members' efforts to build this capacity and this skill. So what's going to happen is in just a moment, we're going to place a link in the chat. And I'm going to ask you to go ahead and click on that link. If for any of you are joining with a phone and are worried about being able to click on the link and navigate back to Zoom and everything, don't worry about it. You can also do this exercise from memory, but we find what's in the link to be helpful. What it is, when you open it, I'm going to ask you to scroll down to page 2, where you'll see we've transcribed kind of the culminating exchange between Ted, the fisherman, AJ, the diversity, equity, inclusion specialist, and Karen, who's the evangelical pastor's wife, comes in at the end there as well. So it's a transcript to that exchange. And so here, Ted and AJ are talking about whether the government should pay for higher education, and that evolves into a broader conversation about the government's role in supporting seniors and in taking care of people more generally. So if you have the document open, I'm going to invite you just to take a minute, glance through the exchange, just to refresh your memory. And I'll pause there, just giving you a minute to read through. All right. What I want to invite you to do now in the chat is try to give what, again, we call a bullseye reflection to AJ. And I'll say we're going to do this both with AJ and with Ted. And with both of them, when we do this, remember what we're trying to do is capture what it is that matters both to AJ and to Ted on their own terms as they see themselves, to the point where they would say, yes, exactly, that's it. You get me. Okay. So first, really just with AJ, right? What's most important to her here? I'm going to ask you to step into her lens from everything you know about her, from what we just saw. What is AJ trying to communicate? And what I'm going to ask you to do is put your effort to these bullseye reflections into the chat, right? So it'll look like, AJ, for you, this, this, and this. And again, it's always helpful to say, to end with, is that right? A check-in, right? To be humble within our reflections as well, to make room for the person that we're speaking with to say, yeah, that's it. That's me. Or no, you missed this part. But I'm going to ask everybody, right, to put in their best efforts. What's a reflection to AJ look like? Great. Rabbi Mark Bloom, really beautiful. Give you a couple more moments. Oh, Karen, of course, thank you. Great. AJ, you want to live in a world where people care about each other and wants to see everyone's needs met, right? It's about respecting each other as human beings, and more so. So thank you so much for keep putting these in the chat. These are really, really strong efforts. And just to kind of show you an example of what this might look like verbally, I'm going to model the skill, right? So if I'm offering a reflection to AJ here, I might say, and this is actually like quite similar to many of what's been put here in the chat. There's no one right way to do it. What's most important is it feels authentic, right? And many of these are really, really impressive and well done. And so here, right, if I'm modeling the skill, I might say, AJ, as you see it, everyone by virtue of being a human being deserves basic rights that the government ought to protect to ensure human dignity, right? That's a right to healthcare, shelter, education, and more so. And especially given the history of systemic injustice and oppression in this country, still baked into all of our systems that have undermined human dignity for so many, the government has all the more responsibility to correct historical and institutional inequities by providing for basic human needs. And moreover, our systems are such that people might work themselves to the bone, as your mom has, and still not be able to get to the point that they can secure a life of dignity or be able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Is that right? Right? So that's what we're looking to capture. And again, many of them in the chat, well done within that too. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to shift, and we're going to do this for Ted. And remember, we're holding off on editorializing or criticizing. What we're trying to do here is capture what is it that Ted wants us or wants AJ to understand, right? Stepping into his lens, what's at the heart of the matter for Ted? And I'm going to invite you again to place your efforts at bullseye for Ted into the chat. Great. Again, thank you, Karen, for starting us off. Great. reflecting of the value of hard work and responsibility in these. Value of self-sufficiency. And I appreciate, again, the question at the end, do I have that right? Right? Wanting to make sure we're capturing them correctly. Well done. Great. These are all, again, really strong efforts within this, and to model again, right, what we've come up with as an example of a reflection, right? Again, no one perfect one, but might sound like, Ted, as you see it, government services go to people who could work and be self-sufficient, that actually undermines human dignity and produces its own injustice. Yes, services should be there to support people who can't provide for themselves or who temporarily need our help. But our default from a moral perspective should be everyone taking care of themselves if they possibly can. You said a few times, I've earned it. Because as you see it, people earning their keep through hard work and not being dependent on others are the very bedrock foundations for human dignity. And that's what it might sound like as well, just as an example within that. And again, I'm seeing these, efforts coming into the chat as well, and they're really strong within this too. So Zioness, really good group you've brought together here within these efforts too. And so now what we're going to do actually is we're going to transition to a second skill that is going to build on the bullseye reflections that you all have just created in this last moment as well. And the skill that we're going to work on now is what we call naming differences. And I'm going to go back to slides again to allow you to follow along. So naming differences is a key mediation tool. And what it means is being able to identify the crux of a difference between two or more parties and capturing how each party relates to that difference accurately. Okay, so we're aiming to get to the point that if both parties were here, right, and there's a difference present that you're able to name, they would say, yeah, that's the heart of the difference between us. And you get me in relationship to that difference. And so in other words, what we're looking to do is to just name the crux of the difference and then offer kind of like a mini bullseye reflection for each party in relationship to that difference. And that can be done for 2, 3, or more people as well within this. And so the question again, why do we do this? So what we found is that the strongest way to disarm the potentially destructive charge of differences is to name them clearly and directly, and to be able to capture the way each party relates to those differences as they see it. And once we've done this, we've identified something that we can actually explore and think through together as partners to illuminate different dimensions and lenses on sticky problems. Now, I'll name this principle of naming differences directly as they arise can be somewhat counterintuitive, right? Many think, we'll actually be able to overcome the tension and conflict best if we steer towards what it is that we have in common, right? And common ground rather than our differences themselves. But ultimately, what ends up happening is that our differences, especially the ones that matter to us, tend to return in destructive ways when they're not engaged head on, actually. And even if our differences don't boil over and become very destructive, what happens is encounters across those differences can oftentimes feel quite hollow or dissatisfying when important differences are there, but they're sidestepped rather than being addressed head on. And so what we're going to do now is put this principle into practice as a skill again, right? So if we're continuing with our example of the exchange between Ted and AJ, we might say something, right? If we're looking to name, there's a difference about X, that difference could be between AJ and Ted around whether or not government services tend to promote or chip away at human dignity. And the facilitator summarized this as a difference around the moral quality of something coming to us from government, right? So there's a difference about X, the moral quality of government services here. And our mini reflections might look like, for AJ, the government services are a necessity for rectifying historical injustice and ensuring basic rights. And for Ted, they're actually an impediment to justice. Human dignity is attained through self-sufficiency in this case. So here's just an example, right, of what that might look like when we're in a facilitator role or we're in conversations with others, and it can be helpful to name this difference. What we're going to do now, though, is we're going to focus on trying to name a core difference, not between AJ and Ted, but actually between AJ and Karen. So you might want to refer back to the transcribed excerpts from the link in the chat. And we'll put it in the chat again for you to have access to if you've closed it. Again, if you're not able to open it, that's okay. Don't worry. This is, again, something that you can do from memory from watching the film. But I particularly want to draw your attention right here to Karen and AJ and Karen's response to AJ as well. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to name what's the crux of the difference here between Karen and AJ. And in the same way, I'm going to ask you to give this a shot in the chat. And this time, when you do it, right, the first thing I want you to think about is what's the difference? Work to name the difference. There's a difference about X, right? At the end of the day, what are Karen and AJ disagreeing about? What's the crux of their disagreement? And then see if you can provide those mini reflections to each of them, right? There's a difference about X. Karen, for you, you see it like this. AJ, for you, you see it like that. Great, so Linda's starting us off here. The crux of the difference is what they view as community. Okay, and Linda, if you were to put AJ and Karen right into that difference, there's a difference about what they view as community. AJ, you view it as X. Karen, you view it as Y. What might that look like? And for others, as you're thinking of what are the differences that you're pulling out, how might you name them? Great. Does government bring us closer? Does government make us more distant? The role of community coming from church or government. Great. So from our perspective, right, in facilitating a conversation like this, the way that we might name this difference, as well as whether or not government is the best vehicle through which communities should care for one another, right? And actually here, one thing that can be helpful is when there's areas of agreement that help highlight what that disagreement is, it can be helpful to name them. So here, right, both AJ and Karen want people to support each other and want to feel like they're part of a caring community. But there's a real difference here on whether or not government is the best vehicle through which communities should care for one another. And if I'm offering those reflections, right, in relationship to that difference, I might say for AJ, given a history of structural oppression, and given the present reality of all the people who might otherwise just fall through the cracks, if a safety net that's more voluntary and less inclusive is primary there, then that's not going to work. Government has to be a vehicle through which our communities care for one another's basic needs. And for Karen, she also wants to achieve that communal care, but she doesn't want us to rely primarily on government to provide that care because as she sees it, doing so has many unintended and harmful consequences, including undermining people's agency rather than empowering them, and also eroding our communal responsibility to care for one another. Government should play some role, yes, but religious communities like the church are more appropriate agents for taking care of each other because they balance empowerment with support, and they better achieve both individual and communal responsibility, right? So again, arguably, Karen and AJ here, right, share a goal, differ over how to get there. But so now that we've named the differences clearly, it gives us something where we're able to really focus in and talk about. And it can feel like a really much more manageable conversation, knowing that there are real differences present here, right? They might not be diametrically opposed, but now we've actually been able to identify, right? You care about this, but there's a real difference here. How do we address that? And so naming differences in particular helps us with a lot of different things in this point, right? By naming them clearly and directly, it actually, again, often dismisses that potential for the destructive charge of that difference that's in place before it's named. And once we're able to name that difference, we're able to identify something that we can explore and think through together as partners, right? It provides clarity, it provides focus, it provides structure to a conversation, oftentimes around what it is that's most meaningful for people to want to explore. And by naming how each party relates to that difference, right, with those mini bullseye reflections, that's what allows people to still feel seen as they wish to be seen, even within the crux of the difference itself. And that continues to maximize that receptivity, right? That capacity to still take each other in, even in the face of strong difference, which maximizes our ability to be able to have strong, engaging conversations constructively across those very differences. Where if we don't name the difference directly, again, it has the potential to fester and come out in ways where we are unexpected and could cause real harm as well, rather than being able to move forward in this conversation. Now I'll say, right, like, so these are the two skills, right, that we have, the bullseye reflections and naming differences. And some of you might have wondered, right, as you've learned the skills we were practicing, so when next, right? I captured somebody until they said, yes, exactly, that's me. I named a difference, right? When do I get to push back? When do I get to say, hey, I see this differently, right? How can I make that conversation go well? And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do, and we're going to take just a few minutes for this. I'm going to ask you again to reflect on, who did you find yourself wanting to challenge in the film, right? And then to consider, how might you frame your challenge in a way that you think that character might actually be able to hear it and take it in? I'm gonna invite you to try to offer a challenge, right, on the basis of that bullseye reflection, right, where it might look like, I heard you say this, I want to offer something different here. I want to push you here, right? What questions would you want to ask the characters? What would you want to say to them? So take a few minutes. Again, I invite you to share it in the chat. Again, building from the reflections and the differences that we just named. What might be your next step? Great. So far it seems like there's a lot of desire to challenge Ted here, right? Trying to say, Ted, I heard you saying, or in the most part here, your uncle provided a real service and gift for you in being able to pursue your work. And then a challenge that might come from that, right? Have you thought about it this way? I want to push you here. I want to ask you this question. Any pushback for any of the other characters, people in the film? Right, there's a question around triaging. How do we decide where to spend specific resources as well? And so what I want to point out here, right, is once we've gone through the process of giving real bullseye reflections, right, when we want to get in there and we want to argue, whether it's with AJ or Ted or Karen or Akram, what we can do is we can practice making challenges that would be much more likely to be taken in because they build from those bullseye reflections, right? At this point, we've actually taken the time to make sure that we've understood somebody so we can be talking to what it is, right, that's at the heart of the matter for them as well. So for example, right, as many have come up here, you might say, Ted, I heard you say that self-sufficiency is what gives us human dignity. I want to push back on that, right? By offering that little bullseye and then to be able to push back. And when we push back, what's critical is that we're doing so on the basis of having slowed down enough to actually be able to speak to the heart of Ted's thinking, right? Rather than past it. And that's a foundation for collaborative communication across these political divides. That's really going to maximize the likelihood that the person we're talking to is going to be able to hear our challenges and take them in, right? Because they're not going to go very far if there's a rigidity present within the listening. And so we got to take the steps to slow down, to build up that sense of receptivity, that capacity to take in, right, ideas across our differences, so that people will be able to hear those challenges and that pushback as well. So I'm going to ask you to do one more exercise with me. And what we're going to do for this is we're going to zoom out for a few minutes to ask kind of a big picture question that many people raise in this polarized time. Some of you might be asking yourself this as well. And that question is, why does communicating across political divides matter? Right? Why does this matter? If we don't do it, what's lost personally, communally, societally, if we remain only in our ideological bubbles? I'm going to invite you to again, put your thoughts into the chat. Why does this matter? A concern of loss of democracy, right? If we can't actually communicate and connect across our differences. We have a sense of further alienation as well. Real hostility that can lead to less safety within our communities. There's a sense of demonization to the other, right? Limited information when we're in our own bubbles, yes. Inability to solve the problems that we face together as a society, and the sense of demonization of the other as well. And I see, right, we can create divides actually among family members, friends, people who are in relationship as well when we don't trust people who are close to us. Thanks for sharing that. What I want to do is share a few of the top reasons that we see for why engaging across divides is important, building on what you've already shared here and going off of Sharon's point just a moment ago. The first is really around the sustaining of relationships and of communities. There was a poll done after the 2016 election that found that 16% of Americans had actually stopped speaking to a family member or a close friend over politics. And that finding suggests the unraveling of over 50 million relationships, close relationships. And that data is from 6 years ago, right? More recent studies suggest that number has only continued to multiply as well. And at a societal level, we're at a point in which many of us think that the they are so evil, so cruel, so repellent in one way or another that we dismiss people categorically. Right? When societies get to the point where huge factions actually see one another as enemy, divides often degenerate into what can be outright political violence. And certainly lost and harmed relationships in families and communities result from this as well. Right? And to another point that I also saw in the chat, the idea of collective insight, right? We're not actually learning very effectively from our bubbles, from our echo chambers, or from silence as well, that without this communication across divides, we lose a lot of the nuance and understanding that only comes from connecting with people who push us to see things we're not already seeing, right? And that we actually really need a multiplicity of viewpoints to see these things that we're not seeing yet, to be able to come to these more creative solutions. Because without exposure to and understanding of differing viewpoints, we're oftentimes just operating with incomplete understanding, false assumptions of both each other and oftentimes the issues we're working to address themselves as well. And to the point, I think that was first put into the chat, right? Democracy as a whole and the idea of political effectiveness, right? There's a lot of ways to say this. For one, political dysfunction at many levels, right, of our government has left our representatives really unable to represent many of us wherever we stand because of the inability to solve problems, particularly in Washington as well. But more than that, an effective toolkit for advocacy and activism, which so many of you are engaged in, right, which is a part of why you are a part of this movement and this organization, that wherever we stand, our advocacy actually requires an ability to communicate and compel beyond our camps, to reach new allies, to build broader coalition so that we can actually really be effective in creating the change we want to see as well. And so that's some of the reasons, right, that we see also of why engage within this. And in just a moment, we're going to turn to our Q&A, but before getting there, I just want to take a couple more minutes to reflect on our own personal steps here and how we can apply the lessons of the film in our own lives as well. And I want to invite you again just to reflect on some prompts here, whether you're already deeply involved and engaged in bridge building efforts in this type of work or new to this work as well, right? I want you to think for yourself, what are some of the perspectives that are missing from your world that you might proactively want to seek out? Whose perspectives would you most like to understand or be able to engage with? Right? And secondly, with whom and where in your lives could you see having similar conversations across disagreement using these tools? I'll just pause for a minute, giving you a chance to reflect on that here. And when you're ready, I invite you again to please feel free to share something that emerged for you from those prompts in the chat so that we can continue to learn from each other as well in the reflections that we're having from that thought there. So a desire to be able to engage with people who perhaps voted for someone different than you here in particular, folks who voted for Trump, right? Others for groups or people who promote anti-Zionism as well, but also with some hesitancy, with some doubt, that's okay, right? And also saying like, I'm trying to reach a broader range, right? And needing to feel more connected as well, right? To reach out, to figure that out. Great. Thank you all for sharing this. And I am going to, in just a little bit, share a few of our recommended next steps and resources shortly. Before getting there, I want to take some time for us to dive into the questions, the thoughts that you're having. And so we're going to pause for about 10 minutes or so of open Q&A. And again, Netta is going to take over in leading this for us. I encourage you, if there's questions that you have that you want her to look at, to use that Q&A function in the chat, and we'll open it up. Netta.
And we do have a couple already in here, and please feel free to add them as they come up for you. But I'll start with Danny's question, because I think a lot of people are probably wondering the same thing, which is, Danny says, this approach requires a basic desire for connection from all parties participating. And so do you have any suggestions when dealing with someone who's not interested in learning or connecting?
Sure. So I think something that is important, Danny, is that people who are engaging in a conversation across difference are wanting to do that. And they might want to do this for a range of different reasons, right? It might be because I want to engage across, right, political difference because I care about a relationship with somebody and we just can't not talk about the elephant in the room, right? Or maybe it's, I want to be witnessed by people who see things differently than me, and I want them, right, to understand. Other reasons might be, right, I want to learn, I want to get outside my bubble, as somebody put in the chat. And for others, it might be, I want to actually have an influence on someone else's thinking. And so for whatever reasons those are that somebody might have coming into a conversation across difference, our thoughts are, that's good, right? And what can we do to make sure that that conversation can go well, which oftentimes means, right, slowing down, figuring out how to get to the heart of the matter for people that you're speaking with, and then being able to keep that sense of real receptivity among people participating. Now, if there's somebody who says, you're trying to talk to me about this thing and I just don't want to engage, that's okay, right? That actually these conversations are going to go a lot better when there's informed consent by people who are engaging in that conversation. And that also goes, right, for all of you, right? If there are certain topics that you feel like, or people, right, that you're like, actually, this isn't where I want to have this conversation right now, that's okay also. But it's about really thinking for when you do want to have that conversation, right? And oftentimes, sometimes we mark our boundaries a little bit sooner than maybe we have a little bit more room towards going towards. You know, what happens when we say, you know what, this might be a little uncomfortable, but I really want to try to get in there. I want to be able to be in this conversation. But it is important that people want to be in that conversation, that nobody's forced to be in that conversation.
And Linda's question is a little bit of a follow-up, so we'll go to that next, which is, so are you saying that an open mind is necessary for these types of conversations? Is that kind of what, does that sound right to you, Michele?
I mean, it can be very helpful for sure, right? And there's different ways in which some people coming into a conversation might enter with a little bit more rigidity, a little bit more hesitancy as well. And oftentimes the best way to open up, right, a sense that goes from rigidity and disconnection into a place of real receptivity and connection is to give somebody a really strong bullseye reflection, right? So if somebody comes in who's saying, I want to have this conversation with you, but I'm not ready to have my mind changed. Okay, that might be really hard, right? And when you're able to offer a reflection, right, to say, okay, so what matters to you about this? Is that right? Right? Then people are likely going to actually be a lot more receptive to whatever it is that you might have to say or to offer when they feel like they are truly known as they wish to be known through their own lens. So some of these skills can also help in a way to get people, right, to be a little bit more receptive, even if coming into the conversation with a little bit more rigidity and a little bit more closed-mindedness, to your point.
Rabbi Amy has submitted a really compelling question, I think, which is, how do you find a common starting point in situations where people are coming into the conversation with very different facts or premises or understanding of history?
Mm-hmm. Great question as well. Yeah. So often, right, our conversations start from a place of exchange of facts, analysis, people offering their political positions. And those are good conversations, and we should have them, and we should have them well. And if that's the place that we're actually starting at, what happens is we so often lose actually what's at the heart of the matter for people. What's bringing them into this conversation? What are the life experiences, the motivations that are forming those convictions, right? And so what I would actually encourage you to do in those moments is to start from a place of trying to understand people's lived experiences that have actually shaped what it is in terms of their lens of analysis, political position, et cetera, as well, because then you're going to know so much more, right, about what's the engine, if you will, that's like driving the car as well with the conversation that you're having, to deepen that, to really get at the heart of what does this person actually care about, right? And to listen for where are the moments, right, where people are hinting at things that really matter to them. And part of that slowdown before even sometimes offering a reflection is just to pause your own reactions and to ask questions, to unearth more of what actually matters to the person who you're talking with. And again, right, when you're coming with a different set of facts and analyses, that can be hard, but just a reminder of slow down, press pause on your own reactions and say, how can I really uncover what matters to this person, reflect them to the point where they say that, yeah, that's it. Then you're going to have a lot more success in the conversation itself. So yeah, starting at a different place or bringing it to a different place can be really helpful.
And to kind of follow what you're saying about slowing down and taking a step back, Jesper wants to know any tips for staying calm when things do get heated, how to know when to stay present and when to take a step back. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, Jasper, this is a really great question also. And this will look different for different people too, right? Depending on themselves and also just the context of the situation. Sometimes when you recognize, right, that things are getting heated, it can so often actually show up somewhat physically, right? You might recognize you're getting actually physically hot. You might recognize you're tensing up. One of my colleagues feels it very much in her shoulders, right? When those start to come up, it's like, oh, that's happening for me right now. And the first thing, in the same way that we say, right, like with naming differences, one of the best things to do to help disarm the potential of its destruction is just to name it. So for your own self, figuring out how to name, oh, I'm getting reactive right now. And then to figure out and assess, what do I need? So for some, if you realize I'm getting reactive, I want to stay in this conversation. Sometimes something that can just be really helpful is naming what it is that's causing that reactivity for yourself and getting present, right? Whether that's placing your hands on the table, your feet on the ground, just to be able to center and focus with yourself there, right? And to make sure, again, you return to, I'm going to slow down, right? I recognize I'm having this reaction. I recognize I am making judgments, or right, whatever those might be. And again, turn to, how can I ask questions to understand more of the heart of the matter for the other person and offer that reflection? That's going to help a lot. And if there are times, again, right, where somebody is saying things that you find to be incomprehensible and hurtful, right? It's okay to say, I really want to have this conversation with you, but I need to take a pause, right? And I want to come back to it. Or to say, this conversation is one that's really hurtful. I need to take a pause from it, right? And then you can come back into them as well when you're ready, right? Or somebody might say, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you, right? More than often, that's actually what happens when you're able to express and name what it is that's happening for you in those moments.
And one of our participants, Paula, says, I'd like to try this within my own political group to work on how to be more open to the other side. And how can I explain to my group how this would be helpful? Maybe she's trying to convince folks to adopt some of these principles.
No, it's a great question. I mean, I think first of all, Paula, what I'd recommend is hearing from some of your group, right? Like, what do they feel are some of the costs that are missing, right? When we fall into the patterns of polarization that are so often happening, in particular, whether it's around politics or advocacy in this case, that can be helpful in generating that for the group to hear what they have to say. And then, what I would say also is that within the context of polarization in our country, so often, right, when we write others off as enemy, right, or the other, we're also not giving space to bring people along who might otherwise actually, right, have a lot of commonality in whatever it is that we might work on, if we write them off all completely, right? And so often people are more complex and nuanced than the buckets that we try to put them in. And so I think first and foremost, it's just about the importance of realizing and understanding that. How do we move past the caricatures that inform the way that we view others? And then to also say, right, if our goal is about really bringing people along or having an effect on others' thinking, right, we can't do that if we've lost the will and the capability to talk to people who see things differently than we do. If we only talk to people who already agree with us, we're not going to be really effective in making change and being able to change other people's minds. And so this type of work is also just critical in being able to do that successfully. Now, I'm not saying this work is the advocacy tool as well, right? There's lots of different tools in the toolbox that people should be encouraged and use in different ways that serve different purposes. This is just one, but really helps in being able to do this work in ways that are more connective, right, with each other, that actually can build a sense of community rather than destroy, and help to engage people who see things differently. And also that, hey, you might be missing part of the picture too, right? There's an element of how can I be humble coming into this so we can come to more creative solutions. The problems we're facing as a society that aren't always getting better.
I want to leave some time for some surveys and takeaways, but just quickly, if we could do one more question. Danny wants to know, some of these principles that we've talked about are embodied in the process of nonviolent communication as proposed by Marshall Rosenberg. Is this something that your group incorporates, or can you maybe share a little bit of just the, where did these frameworks and principles come from?
Yeah, so a lot of our work is based on different aspects of mediation, and in particular conflict transformation theory, where by way we work to really bring people to see conflict in a different way, right? Not one that kind of pushes conflict down under the rug, but actually works to transform that conflict so that it can be a source of shared learning, deepened relationship, and creative problem solvings and solutions as well. And so a lot of our structure is actually based on a few things. First of all, being able, right, to make sure that when disparate parties of different ideological viewpoints want to be able to engage in this conversation, we're able to bring them to do so while going directly towards actually what it is that are critical differences for them, right? Rather than, in some other mediation frameworks, such as negotiation, the question is on, right, how do we solve a solution, right, in a way where both parties feel as good as possible coming out of it, right? Whereas it's very solution oriented. In others, right, there's common ground, a really popular form of mediation and dialogue as well, where the point is about being able to understand what it is that we have in common with each other. And so from our standpoint, what we really focus on, and those are good also, right, like forms as well, but what we focus on is the third around conflict transformation that allows us to go towards our differences, because we believe that even if we, when we're able to actually go towards our differences and come out on the other side, the things that are also aimed to be achieved in negotiation and in common ground framework are actually more sustained, are also achieved through this metric and more sustainable because they've been able to go through some of these hard things together. And so that's where a lot of our work is focused and centered around in bringing people together to have these and to transform the conflict in this way. Yeah.
I think we'll move on to our survey and takeaways.
Amazing. Well, they were such thoughtful questions. I want to say I really appreciate these questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, I don't think, and so hopefully there'll be more ways to follow up. But I do want to share a few really specific next steps specifically for you to take as you leave from here. So first and foremost, right, what I want to encourage all of you to do is pursue these dialogues, right, across divides. Set an intention on how you might get out of your echo chamber and talk to people with whom you really disagree with, right? And practice offering these bullseye reflections and naming these differences in your own life, right? Think of what's a conversation you've been avoiding that you'd like to actually try to approach, or what's a conversation that went poorly that you want to try again, right? The great thing about this work is that life gives us endless opportunities to practice it, to build these muscles, and it requires a real commitment to that practice to get better and to take it in. So, it could be anything from going out to coffee, a family dinner, virtual meeting, right, with somebody whom you have some difference with. Don't take our word for it, right? Like, get in there, work towards a bullseye reflection, and remember, be correctable, as so many of you did in that chat as well when you were offering the reflections. Did I get that right? Is that it, right, for you? Because when you get feedback, it's also so helpful, right, to be able to say, okay, I missed, let me try again, is this it for you? And the conversation really transforms as well. The other thing I want to say, right, is this film is open and available for you to share with your networks. It's available on YouTube. So I hope some of you might consider sharing it with your networks. You could host watch parties, etc., do virtual screenings as well. And there's a whole host of other types of programs and trainings that we offer too. And we'll share a bunch of different resources for this in the chat for you to have on hand as you go from here. In closing, one thing I will ask is actually twofold. One is we're going to share a survey, a participant survey in the chat I'm going to ask you to take just a couple minutes to click on that, make sure it's open and fill it out. Your feedback really helps us learn and supports the impacts for the next film, and including reaching more people and doing this, as best as we can. So please go ahead and click on that. And also, I'm going to ask a closing prompt, right? Just to hear from everybody here, one thing you appreciated, learned, or took from the session, either from the film itself or from the discussion that we've had afterwards. So I invite you to please, share that one thing. And as you do so, I just want to thank you again for really your thoughtfulness today, your engagement with the chat and the content and each other. And I hope that you will take this and be ambassadors for the kind of interpersonal and public conversations we really need to heal our country and our communities, interpersonally, societally, and at every stage as well. So thank you just so much for being here. If anybody has further questions or wants to reach out, I'd say go to Netta for that. She knows how to get in touch with us. And Netta, I'll turn it over to you and just say thank you sincerely so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pop my email address into the chat. If your question didn't get answered today, or if you just want to follow up with anything, go ahead and send an email to netta@zioness.org, and I'll make sure that we get your question answered or get your input processed. We've come to the end of our event today. I just want to thank Michele and Nora and Resetting the Table once more for their important mission, their important work. And I just want to invite you all to stay connected to Zioness in whatever ways feel meaningful to you. Don't hesitate to reach out to me, to us, and please stay tuned for more opportunities to learn and grow together in community. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.